ضيوفنا الكرام، تفضلوا بالجلوس في مقاعدكم، سيستأنف البرنامج الآن.
Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. Our program will now resume.
Roland Busch is Chief Technology Officer and a member of the Managing Board of Siemens. He is responsible for the Building Technologies and Mobility divisions, as well as for corporate technology, corporate development, and the company's activities in the area of sustainability. He is also responsible for Next 47, a separate legal entity of Siemens that drives innovation with a focus on startups. Josh Geigel is the co-founder of Virgin Hyperloop One, which seeks to transform transport through innovative technology. Josh has worked to use technology to solve environmental challenges throughout his career. He led research activities at EcoGen Power Systems, a startup in the waste-heat-to-power energy sector, and was the sole inventor of 4 novel supercritical CO2 power cycles that significantly improved efficiency and lowered cost. Olivier Harnisch is CEO of Imar Hospitality Group. He works to drive the overall operations of Imar Hospitality Group in Dubai and international markets. Fluent in 6 languages, he is the man behind the management strategy for 10 operational hotels and 3 serviced residents in Dubai. Soda Nagano is Chief Financial Officer at GLM, the Japanese electric sports car company. Soda is a lifelong car enthusiast with an international finance background. Based in Kyoto, GLM employs 50 people and holds a number of unique patents to design and produce cutting-edge electric-powered automobiles. Martin Sabah is the CEO of the Middle Eastern branch of JCDecaux, the #1 outdoor advertising company. Through the years, he developed a strong background in finance and investor relations. Before joining his current company, he used to work at ING, where he was a specialist in LBO financing. He began working at JCDecaux in May 2007 as a senior acquisition analyst. 10 years later, he is the current leader of its Middle Eastern branch.
Right. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. Excellent. I think it could, look, we're going to be talking about cities and the growth of cities and the significance of cities and the way in which we are building cities for the future. But more importantly, gentlemen, I want to talk about cities and how we make them livable, whether it's for work, whether it's for transport, whether it's for pleasure, whether we talk about smart cities. But I think it's important, before we go one stage further, that we know which city you all live in. Martin?
I'm living in Dubai.
You're living in Dubai. Bring your microphones a little bit closer to you, all of you. You're living in Dubai. What for you is the defining point about your city of Dubai?
Speed and innovation.
Speed and innovation.
I'm from Kyoto, Japan.
From whereabout in Japan?
Kyoto.
You're Kyoto.
Correct.
What for you is the defining point that you would refer to in Japan?
It's a combination of the historical sites and the innovation.
So 2 innovations. Olivier?
I live in Dubai too, but only since 6 months. So I have the...
Go on then. Go where were you before Dubai?
I was in Brussels before, so a big contrast. Dubai is extremely dynamic. Europe is a bit slower.
What's the defining point for you about Brussels?
Well, Brussels or Dubai?
Brussels.
Well, Brussels is very international, very settled, risk-averse in a way. You compare that to Dubai, which is exactly the opposite. So it's a big difference.
Josh, what about yourself?
Los Angeles. I'd say traffic.
Whereabout?
Near the airport.
Los Angeles near the airport.
Yes.
You spend most of your time trying to get out.
Correct. That's why I live near the airport.
Right.
So.
Defining thing about Los Angeles?
Traffic and congestion.
Traffic and congestion. And yourself, Roland?
Yeah, I'm coming from Munich. And I can say it's the headquarters of Siemens, which is there, but maybe that's too easy. It's about the culture it's about the history, and it's about the business, which is a nice blend.
So, let's start, because the trend that we are seeing, without doubt, is a trend towards moving to cities, the urbanization, to use that horrible phrase, correct?
Indeed.
Tell me more.
Well, urbanization is not only a trend, it's an accelerating trend. By the way, talking about Munich, every week there's a new Munich on this globe, every quarter a new Netherlands. This is the speed with which people are moving in cities. You will wonder, why is this? There's a simple reason. It's an economic reason. People are looking for jobs, and a city is an environment to provide jobs. It's the most effective, efficient way to provide infrastructure, schools, energy, mobility, hospitals. So therefore, it's a trend you cannot stop. The only thing what you can do is you can support the trend in order to make, at the end, livable places which are still growing.
Martin, how important is this aspect? If Roland's right, and he is, that the trend is towards cities, the livability within cities?
Well, I think it's the most important, because obviously you're right. It's, you know, people are getting into the cities to get jobs, etc. But people are also leaving cities if they're not happy with what they get. So I think that's the responsibility of everyone, and we are talking about community. It's the responsibility of the community to provide what people are looking for. And I think that's a very interesting point. It's a turning point now in the structure of the cities, where we see a lot of innovation. I was talking about Dubai before. Dubai is very innovative. We're going to talk about Hyperloop, for example. But we see a lot of innovation from youth, from private companies, and at the same time, the city has to cope with it. So the regulation has to follow innovation.
Okay, but we also hear this dreadful phrase, smart city, or smart cities, which always has me running for the hills when I hear it, because it seems to me, and I see you're nodding sort of as I say that, what is a smart city?
Well, as the world is, there's a buzzword for the sustainability, and there's a massive increase in the population throughout the globe. Everyone has a different approach to that. What we see in developed countries is to retrofit these smart, sustainable solutions to the existing society. But in elsewhere, where they're building the cities from the ground up, where you can do so much more innovative, take an innovative approach to it.
Building from the ground up, Josh. Sustainability, smart cities. Is this even possible?
I think so. I mean, we came to Dubai the first time about a year ago. And growing up in the US, you get to see this. You have this belief that the US is the most advanced country in the world. And you come here and 45 years ago.
No, in the US.
In the US, correct. You have the
most advanced country.
Correct.
I think if you go to many other places, one is disabused of that quite quickly.
Correct. And so I think that was put front and center when we came here the first time, that you walk around in a place that 25 years ago, even 15 years ago, wasn't quite the same. And you see that trend starting to happen here in the kingdom. But you look at what's required to do that and the machinations in that. And I just don't think that within the US I think there's a desire, but there's nowhere near the will and the show of force to actually get it done.
I want to just hear from Olivier before we go further. We're going to talk about a lot about transportation in a moment. But accommodation, the provision of decent places to live that are not only environmentally sustainable, but also people want to live in them. How significant is that?
Well, that is extremely significant because hotels, like cities, are social entities, and as you know, most hotels, the large majority of hotels, is built in cities, and a hotel cannot live only of its business clientele. It requires a broader type of clientele. So for us, it's extremely important that the social aspect of cities remains, that not only market forces are at play, but also that there's a public intervention and a government vision of how a city should develop, because that really contributes to the livability of a city and to the broad clientele that we need for hotels.
Martin, which is the most important aspect of this? Is it in terms of how significant is the question of transportation versus, say, energy, versus, say, open parks, versus, on the scale of things?
Well, I think I may be a bit subjective there, but I think transportation is key, because transportation is basically, I mean, you're exposed to transportation every day. Everyone is exposed to, look at what Josh said. Qualification of LA is congestion. I mean, that's something that the LA mayor should be very concerned with, because if you hear that, you don't want to live in a city which is congested. So I think transportation is absolutely key.
Actually, we are since 7-8 years, we're gearing a quarter of our business and our investment, R&D investment, for infrastructure for cities. And ever since, I was talking to mayors every other week. And I tell you, there's a pattern of talks which we are about. Number one is mobility, how we move people and goods within a city. Secondly, interestingly, it's about power supply, and mainly green power supply. Most cities do have a CO2 reduction target. The third one is about the waste, the supply, water supply, waste, but also, and this is coming up more and more, local air quality. And the fourth one, interestingly enough, is about security. And if you wonder why, this is very interesting. The security is the point where you can recognize that cities are competing against each other. They're competing in particular for attracting talents into city.
And when they compete, what on that list, the number one is what? Security, or is it transport? When cities compete against each other, yeah, what is the defining factor?
I tell you, it's about attracting talents, young people, talents like those people sitting in the room. And I tell you why.
Yeah, but hang on. It's about attracting the young people, but what is it they want?
A livable place.
We're going in circles.
No.
What makes it a livable place?
It's multifaceted.
This is all about it. This is all about it.
I think they go by a lot of criteria, and it's about culture. It's about being able to socialize with other people. It's also price. This is why when you look at the ranking of the most livable cities in the world, you don't see London, you don't see Paris at the forefront because of the cost of living there, and people look at that.
No, you don't see them at the top of the list of livable cities, but you do see them at the most desirable cities. You do see them as the growth, the fastest growth of cities.
But Josh, look, Richard, look at the example of Delhi. I don't know if of Delhi in India.
Yes.
Just as we speak, people can't live in Delhi because the pollution is so high that they have to stay in their house with a mask, and that is the consequence of many, many things, including and most importantly transportation. So you can see that transportation is heavily impacting the way you live in a city.
What is a livable place? Number one is a place where the quality of living, meaning the air you breathe, the water you drink is good. Number one. Number two, it's a place where you have infrastructure, education, schools, and the like. And number four is a place where you can get around, which brings us back to mobility.
I think it's a little bit more like it's the experiences that you can have with other people as well. Sure. So, when we go home, if I go home just to my wife, then it's not the same as if we go home to anything more than just what's in our kitchen and everything. So being able to be in downtown and go maybe to a farther city or anything like that gives me more opportunities to enjoy my life.
Didn't we discover in the 1950s with planned cities, particularly in the UK, that they weren't as successful as we'd hoped they would be, because they became sterile, they became out of the way, and people wanted a bit more than just the basics. They wanted a bit of grime and culture, didn't they, Martin?
Yeah, I think you're right. Sure. They do. It's a combination of everything, for sure.
This is the advantage of the existing cities. They have a culture, they have a history, and this makes them different. Therefore, I believe more in brownfield cities, cities which are developing and going forward, which is difficult because you have to really bring the growth into the city, which is very often difficult to enable.
But Richard, the example you just mentioned, the planned cities in the UK, that's quite an extreme, right? So I think the solution is in a mixture, right? Like in so many things in life,
let's take China.
It's a collaboration between a public and a private sector with some intervention from the public sector, which makes those cities more livable.
Let's take China. Now, the new growth of cities in China is something phenomenal. I think we'd all agree. A new city is going up there just about every year. Well, several cities in every year, new airports at a time. What do you see, Josh, in terms of your Hyperloop? Where do you see that prospective development? Where does Hyperloop work? Well, it does work. And where does it not?
I think what you've seen over there is these growth of these cities that are high-speed rail connected. So maybe 50 kilometers apart, 100 kilometers apart, which are short rides on the network system there. I think what you can see then is Shanghai, Beijing becoming one effective city, and that they'll be able to leverage the infrastructure in each of those cities at a further distance. So the same, there's a rule like people don't like to travel more than an hour a given day. So now with something like Hyperloop, you're able to do that in a much further distance. So rather than having to build new cities, you can better utilize existing cities and just connect them quicker.
When do you hope to have the first Hyperloop up and running?
We're hoping 2021 and then operational 2023. Sorry, it sounded a little weird. Starting certification 2021 and then operational
2017.
Yes.
You've only built one test bed.
Correct.
And as I understand Hyperloop, it is phenomenally expensive.
It's a bit of a misnomer.
Oh, you've got to dig a big you've got to dig a big hole in the ground to make a tunnel.
Okay.
Which is expensive to start with. You've then got to fit it out, and then you've got to shoot the thing along, basically.
Basically. But I think it
requires a lot of energy.
It requires way less energy than high-speed rail or an airplane does. So when you talk about sustainability, actually in this particular area of the world, if it was above ground or underground, being able to power it completely with solar, unplug it from the grid in one way. We talked about energy being sustainable here. Some of the new areas they're talking about, this allows real estate, whether it come into a brownfield site, as was mentioned before, you can use the top of this to be generating extra electricity for that particular site or whatever city it may be going into. And then as far as construction costs go, high-speed rail connectivity, they're building a tunnel that's significantly bigger for one way than a two-way Hyperloop tube may be. So you're looking at being able to do something quite a bit cheaper and do that quite a bit faster as well.
I'm giving you a hard time on Hyperloop. I mean,
Good.
Not that you haven't had this before, but in the sense that it's going to happen somewhere, somehow, but the costs are extremely high.
Yeah, I think...
you built your test bed.
You built your test bed, and I think anything that comes with technology adoption, whether it be in smart cities or whether it be cars or anything, that Siemens does, right? Everything has a cost curve that's going to come down pretty rapidly. And for a prototype that we've built thus far, it's actually on par, the prototype, with what high-speed rail cost is already, and we already have significant amounts of ways to reduce that cost over the life and development time.
Roland, related to Hyperloop and the way in which it would, you've got the huge battle in the UK over High Speed 2, which may or may never get built. You've got cities in the US turning down money for high-speed rail in the last administration. Where do you see things like Hyperloop fitting in?
Proof to come. I think, but it's an interesting technology. You're bringing, basically, as you said, you can increase your speed while getting your cost of operation down due to this, to the running in the tube.
It just occurred to me, maybe some of the people our guests here are not familiar with the Hyperloop concept. So give us the thumbnail.
The thumbnail? You've got transportation that occurs inside a tube. It's a low pressure environment. You remove most of the air out of it, and it gives you a reduced drag. You use electromagnetic propulsion, so contactless for accelerating down the tube, and then you have a new form of magnetic levitation. Apologies, it's a bit different than the stuff that you guys did, but I think it's quite a bit more energy efficient and actually goes down the length with significantly reduced energy costs.
And the speed?
Speed up to 1,100 kilometers an hour.
1,100 kilometers
1,100 kilometers an hour. With the HS2, the joke that we like to have inside the office is that they're going to spend, I think, $80 billion to save 12 minutes, and we can do it in 12.
Will it happen in my lifetime? And before anybody asks, I'm 55.
All right. Well, I'm 32, so it's definitely happening in mine, and it's going to happen within the next 5. So I trust it'll happen with yours, as long as you stay healthy, Richard.
I'm feeling all right.
You feeling all right? Okay.
But Richard, I think what is very interesting with the topic we're discussing today, smart cities, livability, how to make it happen, and look at the Hyperloop example. I think the key point is innovation is moving very quickly. What we need to cope with is inventing new business models, because you said it, new business models, which are going to make it happen, because Hyperloop is a very expensive project, as you say, but you have to finance it. And that's where, you know, I think the regulators and the private companies have to work together to build new business models which are going to actually implement and make the innovation happen. That's really what is key. And you were making the point on Shanghai and the bikes, the fact that you have bikes everywhere. So you have a business model that was invented, but it was not invented with the regulators. And now, you know, you have a rejection from the regulators because it was invented at the expense of the regulator. So you see the point.
So you're nodding at this idea of new business models. Right. When I look at your product, what new business model are you offering forward?
Okay, well, because we're from the automotive development company, so electric vehicle has been around for a very, very long time, and there is only very few examples of a successful or the prominent example that's around, even though it's been talked so much and the money has been spreading so much around the world. And I think you brought a very important point where these projects, and it does cost a lot of money. It costs like $200 million if you're approaching the traditional automotive making way. But in the end of the day, it has to be beneficial and it has to be economically viable to the ultimate beneficiary. And it is absolutely crucial to have the government sponsor and government subsidies and regulatory changes, but at the same time, it has to be economically viable as a company, how it benefits to the customers or in end.
I just want to make a point, Richard, because when we speak about transportation and livable cities, I think mostly about inner city transportation. I'm not sure that high-speed transportation is really conducive to making cities livable, because it contributes also to people commuting in and out of the cities. And then you have this phenomenon, which you see in many cities, people working downtown and then living far away.
But isn't that inevitable? If Roland is right, which I think he is, that more people are moving to cities, there isn't the accommodation, which I suspect is where you come in, because you'd like to build even larger buildings with more floors.
Sure, of course. If the demand is there, we'll build the hotels, definitely.
But aren't you better off? Hang on. Is this the argument that if you build it, they will come?
In some places, yes.
The question then becomes, should you build it? Or should we be using your Hyperloop and moving people further out in the Beijing-Tianjin sense, where you get these large dormitory towns that are parasitic upon the city?
Who wants to live there?
Sorry?
Who wants to live there?
Whoever asked anybody about whether they wanted to live in some of these places? They, you know, if we follow if you build it, they will come. The reality is, surely, there is not the capacity for people for all those who wish to live in all the particular cities they wish to live in. Would you agree?
I agree.
Therefore, you either have to moderate your expectations and live somewhere else, or we have to find new models?
Oh, well, I think there are different ways. Number one is density. Look at Hong Kong.
Sorry?
Look at Hong Kong, the density. How many people you can bring on a square kilometer, still living in an adequate and good environment, number one. Number two, we were talking about mobility. There's so many different technologies which finally make this whole situation change. It's autonomous cars. It will be electric planes, e-planes, e-drones flying around. So it will be car sharing where you need much, much less cars and still have a lot of capacity. So if you take all these technologies, then I believe there's still a very, very long road to go until we really face a huge problem. You have to deploy these technologies.
Right, let's have a question from the audience. Anybody want to join in on the... Oh, good grief, sir. I'm so glad you... Yes, have we got a microphone for the gentleman? You leapt like a scalded...
Richard, I congratulate you. You're my favorite panel host so far.
Well, I quite agree. Thank you very much. Thank you. But enough. Right. So I've got a question for you. I've got a question for you before you ask your question.
Yes.
Munich, Los Angeles, Brussels,
Kyoto,
Dubai. Which of those cities would you like to live in?
Munich, no doubt. And I'll tell you
what?
With all due respect to Dubai.
Have you ever been to Munich?
I've been to Munich. I'm half German, by the way.
Oh, there we are. You don't count.
My question and comment was actually to Roland. So all respect to all the other cities, German cities have a huge advantage because they're green, they have bicycle paths, they have pathways, sidewalks, and these kind of things. So my comment really more than a question, and I wanted Roland maybe to expand on this, is what we need for cities, not for them to be smart, for them to be sustainable. We just need to be able to walk around. I live in Bahrain. There's no sidewalks for me to go. Go to Riyadh, all the cars are parked on the sideways. There's no place to walk. I was in Hyderabad recently in India. The conference center to the hotel is maybe 500 meters. You cannot walk there because there's no place to walk.
We could say the same about Los Angeles.
I don't know about LA. I haven't been in many years. But we need walkable cities. I think this is the most important factor right now.
All right. Don't worry, we'll come back to you in a minute. How do you get walkable cities on a size and scale? Question, Roland.
Yeah, it starts with the planning. There are cities which are planned that you have a borough where you live and a borough where you work. There are other cities who plan better, they mix it. So that means you can walk to your work. I mean, it's all about planning. One last thing, there's a studies on cities, it's also, when I talk about planning, how much public space to devote to a city once you plan it, or how you plan it forward. If that level sits on and this is very interesting, it's a level of 30–35%. If you're below that, you're creating slums. If you're above that, city is too expensive. So again, I'm fully with you. If you plan it right, and this is also about walking, biking, and blending, then you get in the right direction.
Right, but let's take Washington, D.C., planned by Pierre L'Enfant in the 19th century.
Yeah, actually, in Beijing was also planned, but not for the purpose which we're using cities today.
Right, but Beijing was planned with the...
Yeah, you would never plan a city like that. This is getting you somewhere, and then you exactly know what's going on. And look at Beijing, that happens.
Well, I think the answer to that question is that the cities you're referring to, so I said I'm from Dubai, but my earth is from Paris. Those cities are very old cities, and they haven't much changed in size. So, Paris or Munich are more or less the same cities than they were 100 years ago, while the cities you're living in, big here in the Middle East or in Asia, they're new cities, and they've been built around cars.
But isn't the challenge here that you're not going to knock down half of Paris so that you can put in the Hyperloop? Not that you would wish to do that, I don't think. You've got to work with what you've got.
But that's why, Richard, things are changing. So if you look at the European cities, and some of the US cities as well, you have that concept of shared mobility, where, you look at the number of cars in Paris, for example, it's been significantly reduced over the last 10 years, because people are actually
creating, inventing with new business models, new transportation means. People are taking bikes, people are sharing cars, tomorrow you'll have the autonomous cars. So the place of the car in the city is significantly changing. In the US, it's said that starting from 2020 onwards, the number of cars is going to reduce.
Right.
So,
question. Yes. Yes, ma'am.
Hello, everyone. My name is Amalit Rajri. I'm a recent graduate and also an independent researcher in the field of political economy. So my question is basically, you've raised the issue of cost of living. So do you think that there's a correlation between the creation of smart cities and also rising the cost of living? And if you agree that there is a correlation between them, how can we reduce that downside?
What do you mean by correlation between cost of living and a smart city?
I mean that, for example, when you create a smart city,
yes,
the cost of living there will rise.
No. Why? Does it?
Yes.
Well, may I object?
Yes.
I mean, this brings you back to a discussion which we had with Prime Minister Modi in India. He wants to build 100 smart cities. And we're asking, what is a smart city for India? And I come back to the point. It's a livable place which is growing. That means it attracts people. It must not necessarily be more expensive if you do that, if you do it right. Because you don't introduce technology per se into have high fancy stuff. It's really about providing a better infrastructure, using your capacities better. One example. If you take a metro line, as of today, Paris line number 1, we were changing it from as it is to driverless. We could increase the very same line with the very same stations, the capacity by 50%. So that means in investing in smartness of this line, you have a much more benefit. Right. So it's not, there's no correlation between, let's say, cost of living and introducing technologies and make it better.
So you don't think that living in a smart city is more expensive than living in, like, let's say...
No.
Well, define a smart city. What for you is a smart city?
It's a livable city that has...
Which is just what Roland said. Olivier.
Yes. But in creating those cities, like moving from like the regular city to a city that is green, that is more efficient...
Give me an example of the city you'd like to live in.
Tokyo.
I'm not sure about the cost of living there.
Well, I was about to say, I don't think, I mean, it's got lots of nice green spaces, but I don't think anybody would describe it as being particularly livable in terms of cost of living.
No, but I totally agree. By the way, I'm half German also, and the German cities, they often appear among the top 10 most livable cities in the world. And why? Because it is multidimensional. You know, smartness of a city is only one element in making a city livable and, you know, reducing friction and making it easier. But you have the walkable spaces, you have the low cost, you have the retail, you have the culture, etc. And I think that people are looking for that. They're not just looking at one aspect.
All right.
And just, Richard, if I may, I don't think... I think there is an anti-correlation, because if the city is smart...
An anti-correlation?
Yeah, if the city is smart and if the city is livable, it will attract people, therefore it will attract jobs and it will attract companies, and therefore there will be more taxes and there will be more revenues for the government. So, you know,
hang on, whoa.
All in all, it should be less expensive.
Just a minute. It will attract more people, which will then put more strain on the existing resources of transportation, waste management, roads.
Exactly. And this is the equation to be solved.
And that's the problem. So whilst you're adding to it...
Not if properly managed. If properly managed.
Well, of course, if it's properly managed. No, if anything's properly managed, if my laundry is properly managed.
But we go back to the point of governance.
Sorry?
We go back to the governance. If the governance is right, if it's properly managed, there is no reason why, you know, incremental people means incremental strength. That, you know, that shouldn't happen.
Josh, we haven't heard from you for a moment or two, but isn't this really the fascinating part about this? In that, if it's properly managed, of course you're right. But you're trying to build the most phenomenally exciting new development in rail or transportation, if you like, in 100 years. But it's going to be phenomenally difficult.
Yeah.
Even getting the permits.
The permits, but I think to come back to the point of the smart city side, the data associated with that and the knowledge that you can gain from that. So if we look at like our particular system, and the way you could apply this to a smart city is all of the autonomous vehicles driving in that. All the suspension systems monitored, right? They know when the potholes are progressively getting worse. They know when they can go and do the maintenance because they know when people aren't driving on that road. So the capacity that you mentioned, you can do that without affecting the day-to-day life of people, and then people flow through those cities. Same type of data monitoring.
A question. There's lots of people now wanting questions. We're going to really rattle through some of them. Hello, who are you?
My name is Dr. Maliha Hashmi. I'm the Executive Director of the Red Sea Foundation.
Right, Doctor, before you ask a question, which of the cities of the panel would you like to live in?
Dubai.
Fine.
So one of the things I want to say, one of the things in the foundation is more on transportation. We want to increase visitors to cities. And we focus on the Red Sea region, which is 28 countries that border the Red Sea. And one of the things we've seen is 90% of the tourists go to those cities that are easier accessible, and trade happens in those cities where people can take direct flights. So it's more of a comment that I think Hyperloop is something that can be used in terms of increasing trade and development in the regional cities as well. And I think that's something that we should also look at, is more than just accessibility to cities, how we can increase trade through using these types of transportations, including these, you said 1,100 kilometers an hour. I think that's really helpful in increasing sort of accessibility to these cities.
One of the things you have to do, Josh, is you have to get people who've got vision to go along with it, isn't it?
Yes.
I mean, that's a core thing of Hyperloop.
Yes. I mean, like if we look at just where people want to go, the amount of people that want to move places, if you're connecting last mile solutions, so you can look at, people don't really focus on the journey time. You know, a plane's pretty quick, but they are spending the entire time at the airport, so they want to have the whole experience. So if you flew into Riyadh and you were able to get to everywhere else in the country within an hour, then now all of a sudden Riyadh becomes that hub. Riyadh can do that. You can go to Mecca for prayer. You can come back in the same day, and something that's completely transformed the way people live here, particularly.
Another question.
My name is Kavita Rajlani. I'm from Houston, Texas, but I'm a Delhi girl. My question is...
Which of the panel's cities would you like to be in?
Dubai, I guess.
Well, you could choose Brussels.
No, I don't think so, Mr. Quest.
Have you been to Brussels?
No, I have not.
Oh, it's very nice.
My question is...
boring, but very nice.
My question to the panelists is, we're talking about Hyperloop, we're talking about walkable cities.
Hang on, you're from Houston.
I'm from Houston,
That
Texas.
is one of the least livable cities anywhere in the world.
I agree, totally. I got stuck on it. I got married and went there, so...
Oh, well, you're the one she got stuck with. Sorry, I meant the city. Right, carry on, your question.
So we're talking about Hyperloop, we're talking about walkable cities, we're talking about smart cities, and as how Mr. Sabak said earlier, Delhi, I'm a Delhi girl, born and brought up there, but people cannot even breathe. There are children who cannot go to school. They are stranded at home. The schools are closed, really, and this is a reality in this life.
Is there a question?
That's a question. How do we even begin to go back to cleaning up that city, and how do we make it a smart city?
Right. An easy one to begin with. How do you make Delhi livable? Who would like to tackle that?
Let me give it a try. I think there's no silver bullet to your question, obviously, but I believe that it starts with expanding, and that's what Delhi, by the way, does, but in a much stronger way, expanding your public transport system, namely your metro system. You have to push traffic into more public transport, firstly. Secondly, it's really a trend which we see, it's electrifying. I mean, most of the pollution comes from the cars, obviously. And what do you electrify? Hold on a second. What do you electrify first would be your public transport as well, your buses, which are the most emitting elements in a city. If you do that, and a third one, coming back, would be a much better system. I come back to autonomous cars, autonomous driving, which will then have a much higher capacity, yet with less cars running around. So there's a vision. We can do that, but you have to start somewhere, and the first step would be expanding your metro.
Expanding the metro. What role does your company have, your product, that's going to help Delhi?
Absolutely. Air pollution is definitely a major issue. For example, the city you mentioned, Delhi. And we do work closely with the local OEMs, the car manufacturer, and we also do multiple projects to help local manufacturers to come up with a decent electric vehicle, an affordable one, as well as engage into multiple projects on how to transform these buses who exudes the diesel fumes. But at the same time, we also will try to take this holistic approach where if you are sourcing this electricity from the burning coals, then that sort of defeats the whole purpose of it. Of course, like we, as a car development engineering company, we offer these viable solutions where customers can really be able to afford one, and will be the choice that they can make on. But at the same time, we work closely with the government so that we can tackle in a kind of a holistic manner.
Sir.
Hello.
Hello.
My name is Salman.
Which city would you like to live in?
I have the answer for that. I'll go for the new city which is called Neom. That was much.
So I was wondering when somebody was going to raise Neom.
I'm not getting paid for that. So yeah, my question to everyone is that coming back to the point where everyone has been struggling with having a smart city, why don't we have a mini smart city starting initiative, having a small smart apartments kind of thing where you can take the initiative within the companies, within the countries.
Good point.
That we can make a major difference when you're going for long-term plans. Let's go with the shorter plan, as a crash kind of course, where you can work for small areas, which the cost will be a lesser expensive thing in terms of structuring.
Olivier, well, smart apartments. Let's begin with little things and let it grow.
Yes, absolutely. But to come back to the question of a smart city prototype, there are many such cities that are in development. One of them in Dubai, actually, with Dubai Creek Harbor, which is going to be a small 6 square kilometers city just outside of Dubai, which is going to have the smartness, which we just talked about, but all the other components that we also spoke about, the greenness, the walkability, safety, etc., which contributes to making it livable.
So we also talked about the new city, Neom. Give advice, free. What is the one thing that the authorities need to think about as they plan this 500 billion mega city across 3 different countries with borders and huge jurisdictional difficulties?
Well, I think there are many consultants working on that. So, but just, I think the key advantage, based on what we discussed on the many different cities, the key advantage of a project like Neom is that they start from scratch. So it's very easy to build on the best practices without the legacy of, as you say, putting more strengths on existing resources. So, starting from scratch is a fantastic opportunity to look at what is working, what is not working. So that's as simple as that, I think.
Right, you sir.
Okay, well, unlike I'm not going to do the name dropping of the other smart cities, but the region offers a great deal of natural resources and the historical sites as well. So it is great. So in that sense, the Neom project is a great advantage to start from. And on top of it, because they will be building the industry there, and to bring in all these resources out from outside would be very, very expensive. So to locally sourcing these key product or consumer goods, or try to build an industry or manufacturing in the region would be also crucial.
Josh, what would your advice be to the designers of Neom besides put a hyperloop in to connect it?
I think it would be to design it as kind of a software platform, but
as
not
a what?
As a software platform, but
it's a city.
I know. I'll come back to it. The idea being that software platforms are upgradable, right? Yeah. Upgradable. And the one thing that we talked about this entire panel was that old cities, Paris, London, they suffer from not being upgradable because there's either regulations in place or there's historical reasons they can't. So when we talk about wanting to have a future city be a future city in 50 years, not a future city in 2022, it needs to be upgradable from the start.
Sir, your advice, besides putting more email properties in Neom?
Well, that would help, but I think we need to look also at attracting multiple generations, because we spoke too little about youth, and having youth in cities really contributes to the dynamism, to the cultural aspect of a city. And you know, we spoke about correlation before. There is a correlation between age and disposable income. This is why the cost of living is so important in a city.
You're going to get the last words in a second, but two people are there waiting with questions. We're going to go slightly over. The last two questions, so we'll start with here and then we'll go there. Be brief.
Hi, my name is Musab. I'm a high school student.
How old are you?
Sorry?
How old are you?
I'm 17.
Excellent. Just the person we need. Which city would you like to live in?
I would choose Dubai. Okay, so my question is, how do we use the things we discussed, infrastructure, policy, and transportation, to fix the biggest issues that the youth face, unemployment and crime and poverty?
Excellent question. That's straight for you, Roland. Excellent. How do you use all these things you've been talking about to fix the real issues, youth, unemployment, crime?
Well, this would bring me also to my advice for Neom. Really functional good cities, what do they have in common is they have a social system. That means you have the higher class, middle class, and lower class living side by side on the one side, and they have a certain amount of diversity at the same time, which means that you have to plan and you have to bring all that good stuff into a city, but it has to be affordable. It has to be affordable to a way that you really have this balance of the society living there and having an ecosystem basically which is functioning. That avoids, and I come back to what I said before, planning right, giving enough space, public space, that avoids really creating slums and
Hampstead Garden suburb.
Pardon me?
Dame Henrietta Barnett, Hampstead Garden suburb, built exactly that thing in the 19th century. We're out of time. One question.
Yeah, okay. I'd like to mention about sustainable cities. We should be focusing...
Is there a question?
The question is, how can we invest more in recycling factories that are in the kingdom that can reduce the problem of solid waste?
That's one for you.
It's about recycling, it's about tapping on renewable energies, it's about really deploying what technologies which are there and make them use. There's one more thing, which is a common thing for all sustainable kind of technologies. They are most of the time shifting OPEX into CAPEX, so they have a higher upfront investment, but having then a better lifetime payback. This, by the way, holds true also for recycling, things you can recycle and bring it back. This has to be a conscious decision to do that, and if you do that, your total cost of ownerships go down. But it has a conscious decision.
To those that haven't managed to ask a question, it is your chance to participate before we finish. Hands up. I'm going to give you a chance to live in a different city. Hands up, Munich.
Come on, guys.
Hands up, Los Angeles.
Oh. Okay.
You were...
Brussels.
Brussels! Hands up, Brussels! I'll buy you all... Actually, we could put them all in a cab and they'd get there. Hands up!
Kyoto.
Kyoto!
Okay.
I'm not sure they've ever been there.
Yeah.
Hands up! Oh, God, this is so easy. Hands up, Dubai.
Well.
Hands up, Nome. The new city. You're all politically correct. Ladies and gentlemen, our panel, thank you. Thank you.